This is the story of Gladys Aylward, a small woman with a big heart for children. Gladys was born in London in 1902, over 100 years ago. She was very small, less than 5 feet tall. Although she didn't succeed in passing any exams at school, she grew up happily with her sister, her brother and her parents and loved playing hopscotch and other games. She attended Sunday school at Tanner's End Free Church and one day dreamed that she would go on stage. She left school to work in a shop and then trained to become a parlour maid, going to drama classes at night. When she was 23, as she was going to a dance one evening, unexpectedly she found herself in a church service. There someone spoke of mission, telling people about God. Feeling a sense of peace, she began to realise that God wanted her to serve Him. She became a Christian and she started to save her money for the next stage in her life. One day, as she looked at a magazine while travelling on a bus in London, she discovered that millions of people in China had never heard about Jesus Christ and the Gospel. She wrote to bankers, doctors and clergymen, important people, suggesting that they go. But as one by one they all declined, she realised that it was she who was meant to go. Her father asked her in amazement, "What are you going to do there? Can you nurse?" "No," said Gladys. "Can you teach?" "No," said Gladys. "All you do is talk," said her father. And so Gladys decided she would do just that and went to Speaker's Corner to practice. The cost of £90 to travel by sea to China was too much for Gladys, and so she decided to go by rail. Although she was told by the doubtful station master that the route travelled through a war zone and she might not reach her destination. However, she wasn't deterred, as she'd received an invitation from an elderly lady who worked in China for many years and needed help now. In October 1932, Gladys was waved off at the station with her stool, a spirit stove, kettle and saucepan, a bedding roll and cans of food in one of her small suitcases, as well as an old fur coat for when she arrived in frozen Siberia on the way. As she travelled through Holland, feeling rather lonely, a couple sitting opposite her in the carriage spoke to her and said that they would pray for her every day. As they left the carriage, they pressed a £1 note into her hand and a testament. As she passed through Russia, she was detained, but managed to escape. On boarding a ship to Japan, Russian soldiers tried to grab her. She thrust the note into their hands, and they relaxed their hold for a few seconds, which allowed her to jump onto the ship to safety, leaving all her belongings behind. After 5 weeks of journeying, she finally reached the mountain city of Yangcheng in China to help the elderly Mrs. Lawson set up the Inn of 8 Happinesses, where muleteers could lodge as they travelled to and fro with their loaded animals. Gladys slowly learnt Chinese and taught the men who led the mule trains and inn staff stories from the Bible. The men loved the stories, and some of them even started to repeat them themselves. One day the Mandarin, the Chinese leader in the area, came to visit Gladys to ask if she would help the little children in the area have their feet unbound. It was a Chinese custom to bind little girls' feet when they were young to stop them growing. Gladys was glad to do so. As she walked up the road one day, she found a child in the hot sun with a woman. She discovered that the child was unwanted, and so she took her home and called her ninepence, as she paid ninepence for her. Later, ninepence suggested that they should eat less food. "Why?" said Gladys. "Because if they did, they could also adopt a little boy she knew, who was uncared for too." Gladys decided to do just that, and she called the little boy Les. In 1937, war broke out between Japan and China, reaching Yangcheng, where Gladys lived the following year. The inn was bombed, but Gladys was dragged out alive from the rubble and went on to tend the sick and injured. Children had to be brought out of the war zone where they could be safe. 100 children between the ages of 3 and 16 needed to be taken across the mountains to freedom. To begin with, Gladys was helped by 2 young men to carry supplies. They scrambled up rough mule tracks for 12 days and cold nights across the mountains, the older children often carrying the younger ones on their backs, sleeping out in the open, begging for food as they went, and singing all the songs they knew. Finally, exhausted, they reached the Yellow River, but there were no boats. One of the girls suggested they knelt down to pray. After they'd prayed, a man came up and whistled for boats to come. At last they'd all crossed the river safely, and after many adventures, including travelling on a coal train, they reached the safety of the city of Fufeng. The children could be looked after now in an orphanage. Gladys was very ill with typhus and pneumonia and malnutrition after the journey. But gradually she was nursed back to health by skillful doctors, nurses and missionary colleagues. The doctor provided a new medication which had just become available. After she'd recovered, she went on to preach about God to many people, including Buddhists in a Lamasery who wanted to know about the God who loves, high up on a remote mountainside. Later on, she went to China's second largest prison and told the prisoners there about God's love for them. Because she showed them God's love, many became believers and the whole prison changed. She also spoke to leprosy sufferers about God and later went on to care for children in a home in Taiwan. This was the story of Gladys Aylward, a small woman who made a big impact on the world.